History ended on the 31st of December 1918. It was the end of an old era. History began again on January the 1st, 1919. It was the dawn of a new era.
1966 and all that.
A history of modern Britain comprising all the parts you can almost remember, including an unsuitable king, one too many gathering storms, and a good half-dozen unmemorable prime ministers.
The 1920s, an irresponsible decade.
In the 20s, everybody lets down their hair, chances their arms, and puts their best feet forward, only to find themselves in it up to their necks. It is the decade of colourful cocktails and risque dances, of family planning clinics and the Bloomsbury group. The decade in which Yogi Bear invents the BBC, Boner becomes law, and Labour Prime Minister Ronald MacDonald engages in a struggle on behalf of the upper class. An irresponsible decade that spends far too much time out on the razzle and too little time realising that, in only a matter of years, the 20s will give way to the 30s.
To get over the Great War, the people of Britain decided to enjoy themselves. King George V enjoyed himself by marching around Sandringham in single file, turning back the clocks. The palace historians warned him that no one can turn back the clocks. But the king proved them wrong. He kept the clocks at Sandringham exactly a century behind Greenwich Mean Time. This meant he was always early for appointments. King George's wife, Queen Mary, enjoyed herself by visiting antique shops and hoovering up the window displays into her big pockets. She emerged from each shop to great cheers from the crowds. Each time she waved back, great piles of glass and cutlery and precious stones would clatter to the pavement.
King George's oldest son, Lloyd, enjoyed himself selling honours out of a suitcase on the street at a price to suit all pockets. Anyone who wasn't anyone was able to purchase honours for themselves and their children. He was not full of imagination. While visiting severely wounded soldiers in hospital during the Great War, he coined the two great questions that have been asked by the royal family of everyone ever since.
Have you come far?
And?
What are you doing here?
King George V will be remembered for failing to say or do anything at all memorable. The only thing anyone can remember about him is his last words. They were either,
"How is Bognor?"
or,
"Bugger the Empire."
But no one can remember. The Jazz Age.
In the mid-20s, Britain became entranced by all things American. Overnight, everybody littered their conversation with the latest Americanisms like
making whoopee,
hot diggity dog,
big cheese,
jeepers creepers,
zippity doodah.
Nightclubs and drinking parlours opened on every street corner. Barmen would mix decadent new cocktails like the hokey cokey, whilst everyone danced the pina colada. Even the highest in society were not immune to this latest craze. If you listen closely, you may detect hints of intoxication in this extract from King George V's Christmas broadcast, 1925.
Through one of the marvels of modern science, I am enabled this Christmas Day to speak to all my peoples throughout the empire. Well, hot diggity dog. It may be that our future will lay upon us more than one stern test. Ain't that just the bee's whiskers? For the present, the work to which all us diggity dogs are equally bound is to arrive at a reasoned tranquility within our borders, and so let's make hot cheese. I speak now from my home and from my heart to you all. Get hot, Daddy-o, get hot. To all, to each, I wish a happy Christmas. Gee whiz, thanks for the buggy ride, and God bless you all.
The BBC was discovered by John Yogi Bear and his assistant Boo Boo while the pair of them were experimenting in his attic with 2 cardboard boxes and a length of wire. By moving one box slightly to the right, Yogi Bear found that a man in dinner jacket and black tie could appear in the other box, reading the latest news headlines and saying,
"This is the BBC from London."
But even at this, the dawn of the British Broadcasting Corporation, a new, more sceptical approach was beginning to emerge. Listen carefully to this, the very first broadcast, and you will hear the earliest sounds of the fledgling interviewer.
You say this, but what exactly do you mean by this?
This is the BBC from London.
So what you're really saying is that you actually got no idea what it is, and that to you, the so-called BBC, is just a collection of random letters.
This is the BBC from London.
You say from London, but many of our listeners will be asking themselves, but where exactly in London? Why isn't he being more specific? Could it be that he really hasn't the foggiest idea where he is, or has he got something to hide?
This is the
I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Now over to Steve with the sport.
The head of the BBC was a Scottish undertaker called John Reith, later Lord Funeral Reith. Reith insisted that everyone appearing on the wireless had to wear a dinner jacket and black tie. This explains why the British fared so poorly in the 1926 Olympics, particularly in the synchronised swimming, from which, tragically, 5 of the team never returned.
For the first 30 years of its life, the BBC refused to broadcast. Lord Reith insisted that the British people had infinitely better things to do with their time than sit around eavesdropping on complete strangers. But finally, Lord Reith relented. He let 3, and only 3, programmes be broadcast, but only on the strict condition that listeners sat up straight and behaved themselves. The first was the Royal Christmas broadcast, in which King George V talked the nation through his stamp collection and tidied it away, before wishing them a perfectly satisfactory Christmas. Sadly, the King's 1928 message to the nation was never broadcast. Queen Mary had pocketed it.
The second programme that Lord Reith allowed to be broadcast was A Round or Two of Pelmanism, which was transmitted 3 hours a week as the Saturday highlight. It consisted of 4 unknown players in full military attire participating in a few rounds of Pelmanism in complete silence, without commentary. If you listen very carefully, you can hear the occasional cough and some cards being shuffled and dealt. This long-running series was to grip a nation that had, up to that moment, been forced to make its own entertainment.
Under Lord Reith, the BBC broadcast news only when there was news worth broadcasting. This meant there was no news at all from 1922 to 1925, or from 1927 to 1928, and only one brief news broadcast in 1929. It concerned the Wall Street crash.
It has been reported to us there's been some sort of mild upset in New York, where they're prone to panic about these things. Happily, no Britons were involved.
The 20s were a time of great leaps forward in the world of literature. From America came The Wasteland by T.S. Eliot. From Ireland came Ulysses by James Joyce. From France came À la recherche du temps perdu by Marcel Proust. And from England came When We Were Six by A.A. Milne. Edith Spitwell entranced London with her poem Facile, reciting it to music by the extinguished composer Ralph Vaughan Walt William Walton.
Lily O'Grady, silly and shady, sauntered along like a lazy lady, until the under-butler, Malcolm Cutler, hit her over the head with his heaviest spady.
The Bloomsbury Group was the name given to a tightly knit bunch of friends, later former friends, who moved into one another's bedrooms with a view to knitting tightly. Some were knits, others were tight. A few were both. They all kept dairies. The Bloomsbury Group consisted of Virginia Woolf, Lord Carrington, Roger Fryup, Ars Longa Vita Sackville West, Lytton Strachey, Dr. Forster of Gloucester, Isabel, Lady Utterly Quarrel, and Milton Keynes, a new town divided against itself. Of these, Carrington was the only one to resign after admitting to making a mistake. The group's members were all in love with one another, but sadly, no two were in love with one another at the same time. They were troubled by the existence of the working classes. The sensitive Woolf recorded her worries in a diary.
Oh, how one wishes that ours was a world free of the servant class. It is so very tiresome to be waited upon by people so coarse and grubby and hideously unread.
In the 1920s, America tried to inch ahead of Britain, but Britain wasn't having it. First it was reported that Charles Iceberg and Amelia Earwig had flown single-handedly across the Atlantic. This upset the British, who had known how to fly single-handedly across the Atlantic for years, but hadn't got round to it. On further investigation, it was discovered the Americans had both flown in aeroplanes, which didn't really count.
In London, the first family planning clinic was begun by Marie Stopp. For the first time in living memory, the British came face to face with sex. They did not like what they saw. Sex had only occurred in the nation's history 3 times before. It had always ended in tears.
Towards the end of the 20s, Howard Crater discovered his mummy in the tomb of Tutankhamun in Egypt. The second his mummy opened up the coffee, he was cursed. Within 50 years, everyone on the expedition to uncover the tomb of Tutankhamun had either A, died, or B, grown old, or C, grown old and died. The treasures uncovered by Crater were removed from Tutankhamun and placed in the British Museum, where they became known as the Elgin Marbles. There were calls to place them back in Tutankhamun, but Elgin did not want to lose his marbles, so they stayed put.
Memorable dates in the 1920s.
There were no memorable dates in the 1920s.
1966 and all that.
The 30s, an anxious decade.
Historians are generally agreed that the 30s come shortly before the 40s, but immediately after the 20s. This lends the 30s a definite sense of being hemmed in on both sides. It is a prurient decade, a decade in which some people pull back the blinds and peer out, only to see others peering in. As leading historian Eric Hobskettle points out, it was, in a very real way, the age of uncurtained teas.
In the 1930s, America attempted to take over from Britain as the film capital of the world, but with no success. While the stars of Pinewood and Ealing remained themselves and refused to show off, Hollywood stars were notoriously difficult and insisted on acting. Many British actors gained knighthoods, grew moustaches and took up responsible jobs. The same cannot be said of Hollywood stars, who would invariably embark upon a cycle of decline and drive themselves to drink. Back in Britain, Sir Oswald was repeatedly dissatisfied with his muesli. He could not swallow all the different bits and pieces, so he left every party he joined. But that didn't work, so he joined every party he left. Then he changed tactics and left every party before he joined it. Finally, he created a new party just for himself. After heated discussion with himself, he decided to call it the New Party. After a show of hand, the title was accepted with 1 abstention.
Exasperated by his increasing exasperation, Sir Oswald then made a bold, decisive move. He left his old party, the New Party, and founded a new party, the British Union of Florists. As life president of the British Union of Florists, Sir Oswald travelled up and down the country, giving demonstrations to halls packed full of his fellow florists. He became known for raising his hand to its fullest height, then banging it down on whatever arrangement was in front of him. But this was not the British way, so Sir Oswald was put behind bars. Leading ineffectuals such as playwright George Chernard Bohr, Lady Aspidistra, and the Webbs, Donald and Daffy, all visited the Soviet Union in the 1930s to see how commuting worked in practice. They returned to Britain tremendously impressed by the way Joseph Stalin had arranged the table settings, adding fresh vigour and imagination to the shaping of the Soviets into all sorts of exciting swan arrangements, so that others might be allowed to starve of their own accord.
If I had to choose between laying a table for my friend or for my country, I would get the college servant to do both,
said Dr. E.M. Forster of Gloucester before stepping into a puddle. Back at Sandringham, King George V's wife drew peacefully on his clothes. Meanwhile, their elder son, the Prince of Wales, was busy dating Mrs. Marge Simpson. Mrs. Simpson harboured a guilty secret. Unbeknownst to anyone, she was an American.
Born Bessie Wallace Warfield in Baltimore, she changed her name to Marge Simpson and got married on a regular basis. But one day at a dinner party in England, she was introduced to the Prince of Wales.
When the Prince of Wales asked her,
"And what do you do?"
she replied,
I'm busy capturing the heart of a man who will give up his throne for me, and then we will live together in exile, pursuing an empty lifestyle.
In Germany, a young mustachioed landscape painter had put away his easel to give himself more time for world domination. Adolf Hitler was furious when Jessie Matthews won the 1936 Olympics. It proved that a down-to-earth British actress could beat the best Nazi athletes, armed with nothing but a ready smile. The Spanish Civil War took place between General Frankie Vaughan, the Spanish florist leader, and a small but prestigious group of English and American authors. The authors included Ernest Hemingway, author of For Whom the Kettle Boils, and the British writers W.H. Maud, Suspender, and Cecil Day Return. They all formed a battalion to fight against the florists, and then hit upon the best tactic, which was to lie low in a trench just north of Hyde Park. Other English writers determined to fight against Frankie Vaughan included a detachment of the Bloomsbury Group. They arrived in a tank driven by Vita Shredded Wheat, directed by Virginia Woolf, and designed in lovely greens, pinks and mauves by Duncan Grant, with gunner Dame Edith Spitwell taking up the rear. In her memorable drearies of the period, Virginia Woolf records how hectic life could be on the front. They included upsetting passages showing the havoc it wreaked on one's social life.
Oh dear. The lack of any proper changing facilities, the dreadful self-pitying moans and groans of the perfectly ghastly little Spanish people as their heads are blown clean off, the higgledy-piggledy approach to laundry, the utter impossibility of finding decent service in a tank.
The Labour Party elected Mr. Clement Attlee as its new leader. Some Labour politicians wore hats, others moustaches. But it was Mr. Attlee's genius to wear both at the same time. It was this that secured him the leadership.
Not to be outdone, the Conservative Party searched around for someone who could take him on. Finally, they appointed Mr. Chambermaid, who sported not only a hat and moustache, but also a silver watch chain. With all these things in his favour, it was thought he was the man with the apparatus to counteract the growth of florism, led in England by Sir Oswald mostly.
In the 1930s, family life was split in two by the coming of a new board game called Monotony. Millions of copies were sold. Families who had not spoken to each other for weeks would play it, and then not speak to one another for years. Seated alone in Windsor Castle, King Edward VIII abdicated by radio to his subjects at home and abroad.
"I have found it impossible to carry the heavy burden of the woman I love,"
he said with great dignity. It all went to show that constitutional crises were what we British did best. The unhappy couple were then bundled into the boot of a passing car and exiled to France. They spent the rest of their lives trying on new clothes and putting a brave face on things.
King Edward VIII was succeeded by his shy brother, King George VI. King George VI was so shy that he only agreed to go out on the balcony of Buckingham Palace if the crowds would promise not to look.
By coincidence, King George VI married the Queen Mother, though at that time she insisted on being called by her first name, so she was known simply as the Queen. She immediately became the wealthiest and best-loved woman in the world, Empress of India and ruler of the British Empire. She never forgave Mrs. Marge Simpson for all this, and only extended the hand of friendship once she was absolutely sure she was dead. The Prime Minister, Mr. Chambermaid, was deeply concerned by the growth of the florist movement, so he flew over to Munich to meet their furrier, Herr Hitler, and his fellow florists.
Mr. Chambermaid arrived back home to a tumultuous welcome. It was a major diplomatic coup for Britain. In return for promising to be more patient in future, Mr. Hitler was allowed to keep the land he had gone to all that trouble of invading.
Upon landing at Heston service station at lunchtime, Mr. Chambermaid declared,
"This morning I had another talk with the German Chancellor, Herr Hitler, and I gave him a blank piece of paper."
He then waved his menu in the air, ordering
"Peas in an hour's time."
This proved that Britain not only ruled the waves, but also waived the rules. It all went to show that the British Empire was still going strong and there was nothing whatever to worry about. Nearly 7,000 people queued at Olympia to witness the first ever talking pictures on television. A live wireless broadcast from the time captures the excitement.
It's now 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and the so-called television is situated at the very far end of the stadium. It appears to be some sort of box-like contraption, roughly the size of an alarm clock. Yes, and the chairman of the BBC has just switched it on. We are told that it will only take a matter of a few hours for it to warm up. It's now nearly 10 to 7, and I've just been informed that the television is now warmed up. There is tremendous excitement here as the Governor-General of the BBC has arrived on the platform and is now busily trying to tune it in. It's now almost 8 o'clock, and Lord Reith eventually found something worth watching. I wonder what it is. Oh, dearie me, this, our first ever programme on television, was greeted, I'm sorry to say, by moans of disappointment from this expectant crowd. It was a repeat.
Murders in the 1930s were carried out in tweed suits and ties by well-respected doctors with moustaches and difficult wives. Their medical presence ensured that the difficult task of murder was performed hygienically and under the strictest supervision. The corpses were then cut into neat pieces, packed into trunks, and deposited in the left luggage lockers of all the major railway termini. If ever the doctors were arrested and taken to task, they would point out in court that they'd been driven to it by their difficult wives. The judges would then tell them to say sorry nicely.
The war to end all peace. Neville Chambermaid handed Herr Hitler one last note asking for an undertaking by Elevenses that in the unlikely event of war...
1. Would you mind awfully making it crystal clear exactly whose side everyone is on? 2. It really mustn't drag on too long. 3. Clear arrows must be painted on all maps showing troop advances, etc., so that everyone can understand who is doing what, where, and to whom. 4. England must be allowed to win easily. 5. In the long run, it might be best for world peace if you, Herr Hitler, had another stab at painting. My wife says that your sunsets really do show quite some little bit of promise. 6. A list of the 5 causes of the Second World War should be handed out to everyone immediately after we've drawn stumps.
But towards the end of Elevenses, an ashen-faced Mr. Chambermaid announced...
I have to tell you now that no such undertaking has been received, and that consequently this country is at war with Germany. Do you know what? I could murder a biscuit.
The 1940s, a decade of storms and clouds.
In a very real way, the 1940s may be said to have divided the 1930s from the 1950s. Historians are agreed that without the 1940s, there could have been no 1950s. It is a decade of turmoil and chaos. The storm clouds gather, then burst, then gather, then burst, only to gather again, and then burst again. It is a process that is to be repeated many times before the decade is out.
Unlike the Nazis, the British did not have a war machine. We had a war effort. The British war effort consisted of...
The salt of the earth. The ordinary British Tommy went into battle puffing on a capstan, whistling a merry tune and making thumbs-up signs at his chums. His pluck and good cheer proved more than a match for the sour-faced underhand Nazis, who were forced to rely on weaponry.
The Home Guard, armed with nothing more than a nice leg of lamb and a garden hoe, young and old alike prepared to do battle with their Nazi war machine by turning all the signposts around and placing sprigs of fern in their helmets.
Officers disguised as Frenchmen. The average British officer spent the war behind the lines disguised as a Frenchman, wearing nothing but a black beret and a string of onions, so as to distract attention from himself.
Codebusters in specs. At Bitchley and Tetchley Park, highly strung men and women in thick spectacles sat stooped over crossword puzzles and chessboards in chilly, poorly lit rooms throughout the night in order to catch the famous Enigma Cold.
Though often thought of as an American, Steve McQueen was, of course, English.
Bangs away! Get weaving, Burton! My chalks are going for a shaky-do!
Throughout the war, the Nazi war machine occupied its time trying to decipher what the RAF was saying to one another. It turned out that no one in the RAF had the foggiest idea. Talking nonsense to one another is what we British do best.
After the Battle of Britain, Winston Churchill appeared on the BBC Home Service to broadcast to the nation.
Never in the field
When you say never, Mr. Churchill.
Never in
If
the...
I could just stop you there, Mr. Churchill.
Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed.
You say so much is owed. Well, perhaps you could give our listeners some idea about when it's going to be paid back.
Was so much owed by so many.
So what you're really saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Churchill, is that, frankly, you haven't got the foggiest.
By so many.
I'm sorry, that's all we have time for.
For a year, the Nazi war machine bombarded London with Teach Yourself German pamphlets. This period came to be known as the Berlitz. Throughout the war, communication proved a problem. Confronted by a British Tommy, German soldiers would invariably panic and scream nonsense, forcing the British Tommy to reach for his dictionary.
Achtung, Schweinhund.
I'm acting the giddy goat.
Donner und Blitzen.
Give me a reindeer.
Gott in Kummel.
Can I offer you a fancy liqueur?
Schnell, schnell.
I smell a smell.
Hande hoch.
Hand over your hog.
Sprechen Sie Deutsch?
Have you broken the deck chair?
Kommen Sie her.
They're a bit common here.
The greatest scrape.
The Nazis hit upon the devilish plan of locking all the pluckiest British escapers up in a castle full of secret passages and hidden doorways. They permitted them nothing but a selection of ropes, false passports, fancy moustaches and German phrase books, a full range of pantomime costumes, a wooden horse, a catapult, a motorbike, a couple of gliders, and a variety of buckets and spades. Before long, hundreds of British officers were burrowing their way into the castle in order to spend 6 months plotting their escape.
4 British war heroes.
Louis Mountbatten led many daring naval escapades, yet never messed up his perfect creases. However hard the Nazi war machine plotted to ruin Mountbatten's tailoring, the Royal Navy always managed to outwit them by veering off to one side. This led him to a starring role in the wartime film in which we swerve.
Known as the force's sweetheart, Dame Vera Drake promised ordinary Tommies that when they arrived back at Dover, Cliff would be there to greet them with a medley of his favourite hits. As a result, this meant they stayed away, and Dame Vera was forced to abort her plan.
Better known as the Full Monty, owing to his habit of appearing without any clothes to boost morale, Montgomery fought on many fronts, but principally the Y front. Monty mistrusted Patton, who was suspicious of Auchinleck, who was wary of Mountbatten, who wasn't entirely sure of Alan Brooke, who had little time for Bummer Harris, who distrusted Monty.
Colonel Bogey was famous for whistling jaunty tunes. He was furious when someone blew up his favourite bridge, calling them damn busters.
And now we lie on grassy fields, wrote the poet. It summed up every young man's dream. Gracie Fields, or R.W.G. Gracie, was popularly known as the force's sweetbread. Her long beard struck terror into the very heart of the enemy. The moment she spotted enemy aircraft overhead, she would start swinging her bat and sing the biggest aspidistra in the world at the top of her voice. Enemy aircraft would instantly scatter, and the all clear would be sounded.
4 memorable Nazis. 1 bad, 1 good, 1 not quite so good, and 1 with the most lovely manners.
Joseph Gerbil. In a surprise move, Hitler made his pet Gerbil head of propaganda. From his wheel on the front line, Gerbil became the master of spin.
The Desert Fax. General Rommel was nicknamed the Desert Fax. This was because he was always slipping in somewhere and slipping out somewhere else, often suffering a breakdown in the process. Unlike all the others, the Desert Fax was a good German who didn't really want to fight, but couldn't think of anything better to do.
Lord Haw-Haw was perhaps better known as the Dublin-born James Joyce, who, with his wife Eutha, or Hitler Eutha, attempted to flood Europe with lengthy stream of consciousness passages of his book Useless from a secret outpost in Berlin.
Albert Square. Square was the most eminently civilized of all Hitler's henchmen. He had beautiful manners and lovely clean nails. the English took him to their heart. Poor Albert only found out he was a Nazi in the last few days of the war, when it was far too late to do anything about it. He later confessed to having no idea that the man he worked for was in charge of the Nazi war machine. At the Nuremberg trials, the judges took his lovely manners into account. They were particularly impressed by the way he confessed to everything. They took it as clear proof of his innocence. They reluctantly sentenced him to a few years to be served on his own convenience.
Entertainment in the war. Many artists did their bit for the war effort by fearlessly flying to America. By registering their protest so sensitively, they sought to force Adolf Hitler to see the error of his brutal ways. Among those who wished to strike terror into the Nazis by leaving England were Benjamin Britten, composer of Anyone for Venice, his friends Peter Groans and Billy Bunter, the poet W.H. Maud and Christopher Hollywood, author of Goodbye to Bowles starring Sally Berlin.
10 memorable wartime days.
VE Day,
VJ Day,
PJ Day,
V-Neck Day,
VIP Day,
D-Day,
VD Day,
Doris Day,
Deo.
Day AAO.
The American contribution. The Americans stepped into the war at the last moment, just as everyone was packing up. They then reshot it using their own actors, first as World War, then as World War II, then as World War II, the sequel.
Food in wartime was strictly rationed. This led to many enterprising recipes, with all the available ingredients put to imaginative use. One particular favourite involved mixing powdered egg with spam and bully beef. This produced bully egg powdered spam beef and ensured no one took more than their fair share. Luxury items such as ice cream remained in short supply. Housewives were forced to improvise by making ice cream from the superfluous limbs of household pets. Hence the famous wartime expression, walls have ears.
Hitler's final days. A keen golfer, Hitler spent his last days in a bunker, attempting one last great drive. His wedding in the bunker to Eva Brick went as smoothly as could be expected. Their honeymoon was postponed due to unforeseen circumstances. The bride wore white, the groom a scowl. A selection of cyanide-based nibbles was handed around at the reception. A few hours later, the newlyweds went off with a bang.
This is the BBC Home Service. Here is a special bulletin read by John Snag. D-Day has come. Early this morning,
The announcement that the war was at an end signalled unprotected dancing with strangers in the streets. Within minutes, everyone became pregnant. Meanwhile, the royal family appeared on the balcony of Buckingham Palace in their bath, eating bananas on behalf of the nation. Londoners cheered them for being the only royal family in the world to have lived in Buckingham Palace throughout the war. The Queen Mother took the opportunity to scan London with her racing binoculars for any sign of the East End. Down below in the Mall, ordinary decent Britons danced cheek to cheek to Knees Up Miss Brown, previously Knees Together Miss Brown, and Hokey Cokey by Focus, before giving birth to hippies. Everyone was so completely exhausted after winning the war that for the next 5 years nothing happened at all. For the next half-decade, events were available only in black and white and strictly rationed to one per year.
1945. The Conservative Party disappears beneath a landslide. The Labour Party steps in under Clement Attlee, a man with a moustache. Attlee sets about creating the farewell state, which, he explains, will serve people from the ladle to the gravy. The men now in charge of everything are identical Welsh twins called Bevan and Bevan. But no one can tell one from the other, so no one knows who to complain to.
1946. With rationing underway, crowds flocked to the Odeon Leicester Square to enjoy a film of an American eating a banana.
1947. Princess Elizabeth marries Philip of Battenberg. The wedding banquet consists of a dish of spam carved into exotic shapes with a red jelly with half a tin of condensed milk to follow. Afterwards, guests gathered in the ballroom to be shown slides of a pineapple.
1948. The Empire in India is now closed due to poor attendance. The Curzon, too, has closed down, and so has the Imperial. The Vice, Roy Mountbottom, puts on his braid and dons his peaked cap to manage the closing down ceremony. At the stroke of midnight, the main feature stops, and Mountbottom ushers out the end of an era.
1949. At last there is some good news for the Empire. Back in England, an English team wins the county championship under the doughty English batting of Dennis Competent. Your examination paper on the 1940s. Heads down, pens at the ready.
Where did Mr. Churchill announce he would fight?
In the breeches?
On the speeches?
Over the teachers?
Under the lychees?
Which of these was not a World War II commander?
Marion Montgomery?
Marguerite Patton?
Marshall Plan?
Major Diversion? How did the general have de Gaulle? Give reasons.
Test your empathy. Imagine you are Adolf Hitler. It is the morning of the 30th of April, 1945. How are you feeling, love?
Whatever happened to
The Southern Front?
the Northern Front?
The Cold Front?
The Y Front?
General Auchinleck at El Alamein. Say it 5 times, very, very quickly. Compare and contrast A, the desert rat, with B, the desert fox. Provide recipes for both.
You are the commander of a battalion. The bridge ahead has been destroyed. Devise a plan to cross Allen Brook.
Describe the causes of the Second World War. What caused them to be caused?
Heads up, pens down. Swap papers, swap back. Well done, everyone.
1966 and all that.
The 1950s. The age of austerity.
It is, above all, a decade of contrasts. The death of the old and the birth of new. At 10 Rillington Place, Mr. John Christie is the very last full-time murderer to wear a well-cut suit and tie with a smart hat to match. The suave new Prime Minister, Mr. Anthony Eden, is respected for wearing a hamburger on his head. At the same time, there are telltale signs of discontent within the old order. At Aldermaston, men with pipes march in duffel coats. Meanwhile, the British Secret Service is suspected of having been infiltrated by pies.
At the start of the 50s, the Festival of Britain set out to show that even if Britain had lost her empire, she had gained a towers and a pavilion, both of which would stay more or less upright for very nearly a year. Among those who helped design the festival was Conran the Barbarian, who went on to found the Hobbit-Tat Empire, forcing chicken bricks into every home, but not before he'd designed something to go in it.
And then you designed the very first chicken.
This was the 50s, and no one had the foggiest idea what to cook. In those days, the avocado, the tomato, and the potato were quite heard of in post-war Britain, Sue. So I take enormous pride in having introduced them into this country, along with the chicken, of course.
And the chicken was your design.
Oh, very much so, Sue. I felt that 2 wings were just enough, practical but elegant and not showy. And I sought to balance those 2 wings with 2 very simple but tremendously exciting legs.
And did you invent the chicken before or after the egg?
That's very much a trade secret, Sue, I regret to say. But thank you so much for asking. It's been the most tremendous pleasure.
And your next record, please. In 1952, Princess Elizabeth was halfway up a tree on Mount Everest when she heard the news of her father's death. She hastily returned to London with her husband in order to usher in a new era. The Queen's coronation, exactly 50 years before her Golden Jubilee, took place in black and white, as colour was still strictly rationed. She entered the Abbey a princess. She left it Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth XI. It was a magnificent ceremony, signalling the dawn of a new Elizabethan age. An Englishman, Sir Gordon Richards, won the Derby. Another Englishman, Sir Stanley Matthews, captained an English team to victory in the FA Cup. The annual Oxford and Cambridge boat race was won by an English crew. Meanwhile, an English athlete, Sir Roger Miles, became the first man to slide down a banister in 4 minutes. On top of all this, an Englishwoman had been made queen, and another Englishman was about to discover a vital thread.
That very same year, Francis Crick managed to unravel D and A, 2 long twisty threads of a woolly nature, perfect for use in polo neck jerseys and fashionable spiral staircases. Before long, everyone had their own D and A. D and A are not to be confused with
A-N-D,
An important conjunction.
D-A-N,
An important first name.
D-N-B,
An important work of reference.
A-N-C,
An important political party.
C-A-N,
An important watering device.
C-N-D,
An important campaign.
C-I-A,
An important agency.
C-N-A.
An important store.
In the post-war years, most British diplomats were unmasked as Soviet spies. The 6 most important British spies were, in alphabetical order,
The 5th man, the 1st man, the 4th man, the 2nd man, the 6th man, the 3rd man.
Many have never been identified. However, we now know that the 1st man was Neil Armstrong, and the 3rd man was Orson Welles. The 2nd man was Guy Borges, but he kept thinking he was the 4th and 5th man. The 2nd man was, in fact, the 6th man, and the 6th man was the 2nd. Together, they formed the 8th man, who was yet to be unmasked.
In 1955, Princess Margaret rose and fell. She fell in love with Group Captain Peter Townsend, a fighter pilot with The Who, a pop group. But it was considered highly unsuitable for a princess to marry anyone who whirled around the room swinging his arm round and round, making a terrible noise. So the marriage was called off.
America's oldest man, Bill Holey, took the hit parade by storm in 1957 with his record, "We're Going to Rock Around the Sock," causing thousands of fans to go out and buy new socks. His special new sound, known as crock and roll, sent thousands of future senior citizens into frenzies from which they never emerged. Up until the mid-1950s, human beings went straight from the age of 12 to 43. 1 minute you'd be wearing shorts and playing conkers. The next you'd be striding to work in your bowler hat, your copy of the Daily Telegraph under your arm, fretting about your golf swing and the balance of payments deficit. Then overnight, tea-naggers were born, upsetting everyone with their slacks and frothy coffee. They would ceaselessly nag their parents, who all lived in a circle in a square.
The sewers crisis. Britain's new Prime Minister, Sir Antonia Eden, was always sensitive to smell. So in 1956 she sent in troops to sort out the sewers, which were blocked. But Colonel Nasser of Egypt didn't want them in his root canal. This created the so-called sewers crisis, which Britain was forced to decline. The sewers affair put a severe drain on Sir Antonia Eden, who ended up taking to bed with her moustaches, one on each side. Eventually, thousands of British troops pulled out of sewers, and Colonel Nasser was victorious. This meant Sir Antonia proved an unmemorable Prime Minister.
Who would be England's next Prime Minister? The establishment wanted to choose a man with a moustache, so they filled a room with smoke and picked Sir Harold Macmillan, the so-called Knight of the Wrong Knives. Mr. Butler, who had been expecting the job, was convinced it had been stolen from him. He thus became known as Rob Butler.
Harold Macmillan was popularly known as Big Mac. He was famous for cornering people in the street with his moustache, saying, "You never had it, so long," and beating a retreat. He was an enigma wrapped up in a moustache. Big Mac always wore a top hat and tails. He spent his time counting the family silver, surrounded by old Etonians on the one hand and grubby-faced little street urchins on the other. He didn't know what to do with them all, so he put them in his One Nation conservatory and shut the door firmly behind him.
"The wind of change,"
he once said,
"is blowing from the incontinent."
The Angry Young Men was the name given to a group of touchy middle-aged men. They were led by John Osborne, whose play Look Black in Ongar, featuring the black and white minstrels, was premiered at the Royal Court Theatre Ongar in 1956. The first act of the play was set in a shabby bedsit. So was the second act. There was no scene change for the third act. In the first act, the anti-hero shouts at the anti-heroine.
"What do you mean, stop shouting? I'm not bloody shouting!"
In the second act, the anti-heroine shouts back at the anti-hero.
"What do you mean you're not bloody shouting? You are shouting!"
And in the third act, they shout at each other.
"It's you who's
not bloody
shouting! You
shouting!
are shouting!
I am
What
talking!"
The kitchen sink is quiet throughout. The kitchen sink was instantly hailed as a mantelpiece by all the angriest critics of the time.
Overnight, many more angry young men emerged bearing kitchen sinks. They included
Kingsley Aimless, 64.
Aimless was especially angry about split infinitives, modern jazz, and sloppy service in restaurants.
Philip Larkin, 65.
Life for Ma and Pa Larkin seemed perfect before they gave birth to young Philip, who emerged as the angriest member of the Larkin family. As a young man of 65, what made him particularly angry was overdue library books.
Colin Sillerbrain, 63.
The author of Lonely Sunday Morning Outside the Room at the Top was absolutely livid about everything in society. But then he sold the film rights, moved down south to a 5-bedroomed house in Hampstead, and found inner peace.
Arthur Askey, 73.
Celebrated for Buzz, 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 Buzzy Bee, Buzzy Bee, Askey has been erroneously included in lists of angry young men. In fact, he was always perfectly content.
The Americans and the Soviets attempted to make a splash with headline-grabbing projects, but Britain continued to lead the world in space exploration. The Soviets sent a Nick Spud into space and watched it circle the Earth. The Americans responded with a satellite rocket launched by Eva Braun, the mastermind behind the Nazis' V-8 program. This involved shooting cartons of refreshing tomato juice into outer space. Not to be outdone, the British launched their own space program from a launch pad near Hove. The excitement was palpable, as this broadcast makes clear.
This is indeed a tremendously exciting day for the ladies and gentlemen involved in the British space program. The Russians sent a chimp into space. In return, the Americans sent a champ into space. Not to be outdone, we British are about to send a chump into space.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1...
And off goes the British chump. My goodness, what a magnificent sight. Whoops! Oh, dearie me, he swore he knew the way before he set off, but it now looks as though he's taken a wrong turning, and now he seems to have run out of petrol. And the windscreen wipers have packed up. Oh, what a rotten piece of luck. He's just wound down the window of his rocket on the off chance there'll be a passerby who can give him a bit of a push. But what a good sport he's been, and that's the main thing.
The mid-1950s came to be seen as the watershed years. Up to 1955, Britain had precious few watersheds. But then there was a boom in watersheds, with a new watershed constructed every few minutes. A major watershed was employed by Lady Chatterbox. Lady Chatterbox frolicked in this secret love shed with her gamekeeper, David Mellor, and a penguin. Her husband, Sir Chatterbox, a miniature car in a box, knew nothing about it. The three of them were prosecuted under the Scene Publications Act, charged with putting a watershed to improper use. Many distinguished figures, including Dr. E.M. Foster of Gloucester and Dame Rebecca Vest, appeared on behalf of the penguin.
"You wouldn't wish to house your wife or your servant in a watershed,"
said the judge.
"Or certainly not both at the same time."
Before you could say John Robinson, Lady Chatterbox's dwelling was declared a landmark watershed, attracting many millions of visitors from the National Thrust.
In the film Sicko, actress Janet Leigh arrived at a 3-star motel. After settling in, she was stabbed to death in her watershed by Anthony Perkins, the more sinister half of the TV duo Pinky and Perkins. But on the plus side, the room was clean and the service prompt.
Your examination paper on the 1950s. Heads down, pens at the ready.
Why did the coronation chicken cross the road?
The angry young men. Do you A, agree?
Or B, disagree with this statement?
If you don't disagree with it, why not?
I said, why not?
Well, that's exactly what I said.
I'm not going to ask you again.
Okay, that's it. I've just had about enough. Look, answer me.
Yes or no?
Oh, how many more times do I have to tell you?
Compare and contrast any two of the following. A, Lady Chatterley's lover. B, Lady Chatterley's liver. C, Lady Chatterley's loafer. D, Lady Chatterley's loofah. Keep your reasons to yourself.
How much is that doggy in the window? Answer to within 1 decimal point.
Does your chewing gum lose its flavour on the bedpost overnight? Cite reasons.
You should stop writing now. The 1960s, a decade of loose change.
Overnight, everyone is young, cool and without, discarding first their inhibitions and then their clothes. Swinging London witnesses an explosion of the counterculture, when millions of young men and women make their way to London's fashionable Carnaby Street to serve behind counters.
Harold Macmillan was a politician with bottom. When he was returned to office in 1959, he announced,
"The class war is obsolete,"
adding,
"or what I'm told the common people call out of date."
But in the 1960s, representatives of the classless society took the world by storm. They included
David Cockney,
Modern artist from the north.
David Burley,
Star of Blow Off by Antonio Nioni.
Albert Fingy,
Northern star of the runniness of a long-distance loner.
Princess Margaret,
Pocket-sized Cockney princess.
Michael Payne,
East Den star of The Duchess of Alfie.
Mary Quinns,
Identical Cockney fashion designers.
Tuppenny Stamp,
Cockney actor.
Edward Teeth,
Future former Prime Minister from the East Den.
Twiglet,
Wafer-thin savoury snack from the East Den.
These are just some of the extraordinarily colourful 60s characters we shall meet later in this episode. But scientists have now firmly established that the 50s did not finish until some way into the 60s, so we must wait a good few years. First, we must pay a visit to the 50s in the 60s. Jack Profumo Affair was a Vice Minister of Affairs who swam into the nubile young Christine Squealer while the two were attending a topless cocktail party in the swimming pool of Cleavage, the stately home. One thing led to another. Mr. Profumo Affair and Miss Squealer ended up lying in the house as the legless man passed around Nibbles in a mask. Meanwhile, Margaret, Duchess of Gargle, was taken aback and affront.
"You never had it so good."
The General Pubic was aghast, agog, and akimbo. They had never imagined that old squares formed triangles in high circles. The elderly guests who gathered naked at Cleavage became known as the Swinging 60s.
Sensing the onset of the 60s, the legendary Big Mac decided to make way for an older man. He chose Sir Alec Stately Home, an unmemorable Prime Minister. But ordinary, decent Britons soon became convinced that the 60s were around the corner, so they elected Harold Wilson, who was determined to uncover the whereabouts of the 60s. He sensed they were long overdue. At the time, Harold Wilson was seen as a memorable Prime Minister, though no one can now remember why.
By 1963, the 50s had been going on for nearly 13 years. They might have continued forever, but one day a wealthy entrepreneur called Albert Einstein happened to walk into a cavern in Liverpool and chanced upon the 60s. Standing on a stage little bigger than a shoebox were the Beatles, playing all the most famous Beatles songs, including Love Me Do, She Loves You, and I Love Her. All you need is love from me to you. She can't buy me love me do, and I feel I want to hold your hand, and I love her from me to all you need is love me do.
The news of Einstein's historic discovery soon reached London. Everyone was once again proud to be British and started to swing. They all grew their hair so that the 60s would feel at home. The new Prime Minister was so delighted by the discovery of the 60s that he ordered the Queen to give the Beatles their OBEs back. But within the space of a few years, it had all gone pear-shaped. The Beatles' hair kept growing and growing, over their collars, over their backs, down their legs and into their shoes, even though at that stage they refused to wear any.
Some of the Beatles went abroad to find beards. After recording Abbey National, they broke up, citing financial differences.
The Profumo Affair gave birth to the new sad attire movement, in which brilliant young men from Oxford and Cambridge paraded in cutting-edge polo necks in shows like That Was Week, That Was, presented by the young David Frostbite, who was once said to have risen without a face. The attire movement centred around London's Carnaby Street, home to all the very latest cutting-edge fashion designers and hairdressers, among them Gore Vidal and Siegfried Sassoon. Revolutionary 60s clothes included
the Mini.
With 2 in the front and 2 in the back, the Mini could fit into the most cramped spaces, but looked better on those with skinny legs.
The Polar Neck.
Worn by key 60s explorers, including Anthony Armstrong-Jones, later Lord C.P. Snow, and top conductor André Pervert, the polo neck was designed to keep photographers and dance instructors warm in simulated Arctic conditions.
The turtleneck.
Many fashionable old people were in their 60s in the 60s. They had turtlenecks, which is why they wore polo necks.
The flowery tie.
Up to the 1960s, by law, all men's ties had to be black, or, if licensed, but even then, strictly for party wear only, a very dark grey. Until 1959, anyone caught wearing a flowery tie faced arrest and possible deportation.
Bell-bottoms.
Those with bell-bottoms were probably better off wearing long dresses, or, in the case of men, jackets with vents.
It's after midnight here in London. It's crowded as it's never been crowded before. There's literally now not a single place where you can
In
get anybody else
1966, England beat West Germany by 40-2 to win the World Cup. This was the last time in history when every player in the England team was called Bobby. Their average age was 53.
And Bobby passes to Bobby, who passes it to Bobby. Oh, and a great save there from Bobby.
The announcement of victory was greeted by dancing in the street. The English were magnanimous in victory, rounding up the West German losers and placing them in detention centres after giving them a fair trial. News of the English victory was greeted with envy by all the other nations of the world. After so many long, hard years, foreigners were forced to recognise that England had at last regained its empire Leicester Square.
In 1968, the lifelong conservatory Enoch Scowell delivered a momentous speech. The Tory leader, Mr. Edward Teith, immediately condemned the speech as likely to excite facial tension. Hundreds of ordinary, indecent Britons marched on the House of Commons in support of Mr. Scowell. His speech led to the foundation of the I'm Barking Britain campaign, formed by ordinary working people who were determined to put the bait back into Britain.
After a slow start, the 60s was soon underway, just in time for the 70s. Sex, which had been strictly formal, was fast becoming casual. Some young people even claimed to be doing it for pleasure. The British version of a pop record called Je t'aime, moi non plus, which translates as I'm not quite as tame as you are, was banned because it featured two people snoring in time to the music. A Midlands housewife called Mrs. Mary Whitewash began to campaign against filth on television. Some argued that she saw sex where none existed, but she strongly denied it.
We're not just talking about the BBC 9 o'clock nudes. We're talking about the Queen's Peach. We're talking about Sir Kenneth Clarke's S&M Nation. We're talking about Blue, Bluer, Bluest Peter. We're talking about Love Match of the Day. Everywhere you look, it's just filth, filth, filth.
In the 1950s, the only drug had been aspirin. People were forced to make their own entertainment, a game of whist, a session of ballroom dancing, or a round of bingo. But in the 1960s, drugs became freely available. Photographic evidence from the time shows people smiling. These are addicts. Drugs led to hair growth and loss of shoes. Overnight, drug references turned up in popular songs. It is a well-known fact that if you take the initial letters of the Beatles' Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, it becomes all too clear that the song is all about the drug Litzwid.
The lead singer with the stolen bones, Mick Jagger, was anointed the voice of youth. A former student of the LSD, Jagger assembled a pop group consisting of Bill Y., Charlie Watt, Cliff Richard and Brian Jones, who was already dead. For their first 5 years they had greatest hits, and for the next 35 years they played them.
In 1967, police discovered Mick Jagger tucking into a Mars bra with his girlfriend, Miss Marianne Handful, and arrested both of them. They claimed in court that Miss Handful had been wearing nothing but a fur rug over her drugs bust. Jagger was taken to court and charged with being in possession of Miss Handful. A packed courtroom was informed that he was the voice of youth, so the establishment was sent for. Keen to understand the younger generation, the establishment sent out first for a butterfly and then for a wheel. They spent the rest of the day trying to stick a wheel to the butterfly, but with no success.
The 60s witnessed an increasing amount of student rest, often involving lengthy sit-ins. Young people would sit down, often on top of one another. It was all part of what came to be called the generation lap.
Demonstrations were more idealistic in America and more glamorous in France, but at least in Britain they were much less crowded. Whereas the American protest movement took as its slogan, "Tune in, turn on, and drop out," the British protest movement preferred the more relaxing, "Tune in, turn over, and drop off." In America, the civil rights movement came to a head with a speech from Dr. Martin Luther King. But times had moved on. In this, his only British interview, Dr. King came up against a new, less deferential type of BBC interviewer.
So, Dr. King, as I understand it, you claim to have had some sort of a dream.
I have a dream that one day this nation will
But the big question is
rise
when
up.
exactly. That's what our listeners will want to know. They'll be saying, it's all very well saying you had a dream. We've all had dreams. Every night we have dreams. But if you believe that this dream of yours is going to come about, then what precisely is the time scale we're talking about?
I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of
Well,
former
they're not
slaves...
exactly red, are they? What do you have to say to that, Dr. King?
I have a dream
Yes or no?
that my 4 little children
Gonna have to rush you, Dr. King.
will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color
I'm
of
sorry,
their...
we're going to have to leave it there. And now, Steve, with the sport.
Unlike the British, the Americans had never won the World Cup, had a royal family, or climbed Everest. So they had spent a fortune trying to put the first man on the moon, using the latest science and technology to give them an unfair advantage. The American astronauts even had special suits made for the expedition, and travelled there not with grappling irons, ropes and hard-wearing boots, but just sitting down in a rocket. The British space project had no need for special suits or the very latest technology. Instead, it involved the imaginative use of elastic bands, balsa wood, and a dab of glue. In July 1969, the American astronaut Neil Armstrong became the first man on the moon. Happily, no Britons were involved.
It's one small step for man.
He was overheard admitting. He landed at 3:56 in the morning, when he knew that ordinary, decent Britons would be asleep. In the end, we decided that going to the moon wasn't worth the bother. Deciding not to bother was what the British did best.
In the 60s, the royal family began to worry that they were going out of fashion. So Prince Philip said they should all wear kilts and hold weekly barbecues on television. At that time, the royal family still had very few members. This was before its big recruitment drive of the 1970s and 1980s. But once the general public had seen them enjoying barbecues on television, everyone wanted to join in. So by the 1990s, the royal family had far more members than it could cope with, and some were forced to stand. Your examination paper on the 1960s. Heads down, pens at the ready.
If the USA had managed to win the World Cup in 1966, would they have still felt the need to prove themselves by sending a man to the moon?
Explain within reason how the first man on the moon failed to stop the inexorable rise of Adolf Hitler.
Is this the Northern Ireland question? If not, what is?
What would have happened to Mick Jagger if he had been able to get satisfaction? Answer on both sides of the sheets.
This is the dawning of the age of Aquarius. Why did it need mending?
Answer any 5 of the following 4 questions. Who lives Che Guevara?
Who's afraid of Virginia Woolf?
Voulez-vous coucher avec moi?
He would, wouldn't he?
Do you know the way to San Jose? Illustrate employing diagrams where necessary. Heads up, pens down. Stop writing now. The 1970s, a vulgar decade.
As the 60s turn into the 70s, suddenly everything goes terribly wrong. When the news reaches the Beatles that the 60s have been discontinued, they are depressed and split up, citing musical similarities. The breakup is very upsetting for everyone, except for Ringo, who doesn't get to hear about it for another 10 years. From now on, everyone in the 70s is very, very depressed.
A depressing football result.
Many foreign newspapers put about rumours that West Germany had beaten England in the first round of the 1970 World Cup. But of course it didn't count because A, we weren't playing on our home ground, and B, we'd only just won the real World Cup, so we obviously needed time to get our breath back. English soccer experts agree there have been no proper World Cup since then, and there won't be any in future, or at least not until England wins.
A depressing conversion.
In 1971, the pound was decimated, which made everyone even more depressed. Decimation meant that the penny farthing was abolished, causing ordinary decent Britons to ride around on a cycle of depression. As Britain took to the continental way of adding up, what had once been clear now became muddled. Where there had once been a handy 144 pennies in a pound, there were now just 100 kilometres. And where there were an easy-to-remember 12 pennies in a shilling, there were now 5 kilowatts. And that was no help, because ounces didn't exist anymore. A half-crown had been 2 6, or 2/6, and now you couldn't get change for an ordinary Fahrenheit. Ordinary decent Britons were further muddled and depressed when Mr. Edward Teith, the unmemorable leader of the Conservative Party, converted the country to the continental system of the 3-day week. From now on, he announced, the week would consist of just 3 days, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, to run simultaneously. To further complicate matters, in 1974, Mr. Teith decided that instead of one general election every 5 years, there'd be 2 general elections every 1 year. But by mistake, in 1974, he lost the second election. He spent the rest of his life trying to find it, but without success.
In America, water bottle was already very hot. President Richard M. Nixon had secretly sent his plumbers over the road to fix a faulty water bottle in a bedroom occupied by his rival, George McGovern, whom he suspected of having a made-up name to give him a better chance of winning. Under pressure, Nixon threatened to appear before Congress in peach. This prompted a public outcry, and he resigned. His successor was Gerald Ford, an unmemorable president, even to himself. On being told he was now president, Mr. Ford coughed politely and continued with his round of golf.
British scandals that depressed the world.
The depressing honours scandal.
Historians now believe that Prime Minister Harold Wilson probably retired in 1977, or somewhere around then. He left strict instructions on luxury lavender toilet tissue that the following persons should receive honours.
The Gay brothers, knighthoods for Sir Ronald, Sir Reginald and Sir Charles Gay for services to the protection industry, Lord Crippen for services to medicine, Dame Linda Lovelace for services to the motion industry, Sir Norman Bates for services to the hotel and leisure industries.
The depressing fourth man scandal.
Anthony Blunt turned out to have been anything but. On closer investigation, it emerged that for years, instead of painting the Queen's portrait, he had secretly been the fourth Beatle. Having struck up a youthful friendship with the first, second and third Beatles, Blunt had secretly released hundreds of records. When his home was raided by the Secret Services, or M25, they uncovered a Beatle wig, a pair of flared trousers, and the charred remains of a used drum kit.
Depressing shocks.
Germaine Greer published The Female Unicorn. It was hailed as a feminist breakthrough by the critical establishment. They all said they were frankly amazed that so many long words had come out of that pretty little head of hers.
The birth of pun rock can be dated to 1976, when the controversial young group The Six Pastels appeared on television, swerving at the veteran interviewer Bill Grumpy. On stage, the Six Pastels sat in the direction of the audience. Their songs were full of dad language. The Six Pastels released a single called God Shave the Clean. Other notable pun rock groups included The Darned, The Class, and Generating Eggs.
A handful of depressing disappearances.
It was a decade of power cuts and blackouts. When the lights came back on again, a number of people had vanished.
Carlos the Jackal, real name Charles Jackal, was responsible for everything that went wrong in the 70s, including the 3-day week, water bottle, Tootle Coordinates and Bucks Fizz, the Eurovision Spooner Contest winners. Jackal first came to prominence when President de Gaulle, with typical French de haut en bas, refused to acknowledge he had just been assassinated by him. Throughout his career, Carlos the Jackal kept escaping from the police by growing a moustache and then, the minute they had run past, shaving it off again. He had over 20 different passports, each with a different photograph in which, in a dramatic double bluff, he looked exactly the same. He was played in the film by the English actor Edward the Fox.
Like many aristocrats before him, Lord Lucan mistook his nanny for his wife. In a terrible muddle, he killed his nanny, which was still illegal in those days. Next, He disappeared into thin air, never to be seen again. But over the years there have been many sightings. These include leading the pop group Queen in a white vest and armband at Wembley, posing as Carlos the Jackal in a passport booth, skulking underwater in Loch Ness, and lurking beneath a white beard and red cape in a specially constructed grotto in Debenhams, Ipswich.
A depressing glimmer of light.
The only glimmer of light in the 70s was provided by the marriage of the Queen's daughter, HRH Princess Anne, to Captain Mark, a horse.
This is a fairy tale wedding,
observed the Archbishop of Canterbury.
Between a horse and his rider.
The crowds went wild as Princess Anne rode her intended down the aisle. On the strength of this unusual pairing, Princess Anne was awarded the title of BBC Sports Personality of the Year. At the same time, Captain Mark gained 3 rosettes. The great movie success of the decade was Jaws, about a seaside community threatened by sharks. This was followed by many copycat films, including Cause, a rural community threatened by blackbirds, and Boars, a retirement community threatened by raconteurs.
I think it was the great Johnny Gilbert.
Oh my God! Oh my God!
Get out, everybody! Get out!
Oh my God! Oh no!
It's too late! He's got him! There's nothing we can do!
Oh my God!
The depressing winter of discontent.
To ensure he presented his sunniest face to the British electorate, Prime Minister James Callaghan decided to relocate to a beach villa. There he spent his days sipping pina coladas in a straw hat, engaging in bridge-building exercises with world leaders such as Discard Guesthouse of France, Helmut Schutt of West Germany, and President Jimmy Clutter of America. In the afternoons, President Clutter liked to go out jogging in a headband and collapse in a heap. News never reached Mr. Callaghan of the winter of discontent when everyone in Britain went on strike. It was what we British did best.
Arriving at Heathrow Airport in a garland of flowers and a straw skirt, Prime Minister Callaghan wiggled his hips, brought out a pair of castanets and sang, "Crisis? What crisis?" to a calypso beat. Sadly, he had misjudged the rhythm of the electorate and lost the subsequent general election.
A depressing Christmas broadcast.
As the 70s wore on, the media grew ever more intrusive. The royal family, who for so long had been treated with reverence, were now regularly subjected to intrusive cross-questioning, as this extract from Her Majesty the Queen's Christmas broadcast makes all too clear.
Traditionally, Christmas is a time at which people the world over agree to put aside their differences and join together in one purpose. Over the past year, I have visited a great many countries and...
Let me just stop you there, if I may. What exactly do you mean when you say people the world over?
Well, I suppose what I mean is, people all over the world.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but as I see it, you're trying to claim that people all over the world traditionally join together in one purpose at Christmas. With all due respect, Your Majesty, a lot of our listeners are going to be saying to themselves, this lady is, quite frankly, living in cloud cuckoo land.
Well, I'm sorry if
And what's more, they'll be asking themselves, why on earth do we have to listen to this hogwash when we could be putting our feet up on Christmas afternoon? So what do you say to that, Your Majesty?
Well, I was only trying to be nice. I was just trying
I'm afraid that's all we've time for. Over the sleeve with the sport.
A ray of British hope.
Agnetha, Benny, Bjorn and Annifrid. 4 very British singers, who together formed the British world-beating pop group otherwise known as ABBA. ABBA, who all hailed from Swindon, first came to prominence when they won the Eurovision Song Contest for Britain back in 1974 with that very British hit Waterloo, which celebrated another great British victory by our troops at Trafalgar.
The dawn of a new era.
When Mr. Edward Teith was forcibly ejected as leader of the Conservatories, he was replaced by Mrs. Thatcherism, a memorable Prime Minister. Mrs. Thatcherism was twinned with Monitorism, the invention of Milton Keynes, a new town divided against itself.
Margaret Thatcherism spent her childhood in a grocer's shop. Her father gave her a slicing machine to operate, and she immediately set to work dividing opinion. Campaigning against Mr. Teeth for the leadership of the Conservatives, she put on a funny face and grinned a lot, saying,
"You gurn if you want to. The lady's not for gurning."
This endeared her to the party frightful, who thought it high time they were led by someone they were terrified of. Following the summer of discotheque and the winter of discontent, the decade ended with Margaret Thatcherism standing outside number 10 Downing Street, reciting the memorable words,
"Where there is disco, may we bring harmony."
Your examination paper on the 1970s. Heads down, pens at the ready. Write your name on top of each sheet. Write it over and over again, with more and more elaborate curlicues beneath it. Now draw smiley faces inside each B, D, G, O, P, and Q. Wait until the little hand is on 12 and the big hand is on 11 before getting round to answering these questions. Time up.
Why do its detractors always refer to it as a common market? Explode with diagrams.
Would you rather be in Europe but not of Europe? On Europe but not inside Europe? Over Europe but not above Europe? Or out of Europe but not behind Europe?
Did anyone say it would be EC?
To what extent did glam rock prevent the rise of Adolf Hitler?
Who, if anyone, was the Prime Minister between Harold Wilson and Mrs. Thatcherism? Did he wear glasses? List what you cannot remember about him, giving samples.
2 little boys have 2 little toys. Each has a wooden horse. How many wooden horses do they have to the nearest 10?
If the Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh was the leader of the Orange people, who was the leader of the Republicans?
Draw a scale map of Barbara Castle with ramparts.
Decimalisation. If a half-crown was 2 6, then what was 2 6?
Do you A, agree, or B, disagree with this statement? Give reasons.
Is this the way to Amarillo? If not, why not?
Heads up, pens down. Stop writing. The 1980s. An avaricious decade. The decade is characterized by greed and avarice. By the end of the 1980s, shopping has been officially recognized as an Olympic sport. In the city, brash young floor traders smoke pinstripe cigars and wear red braces on their teeth. They chain-smoke their filofaxes as they trade away the floors they stand up on. But before very long, the balloon goes up, and this leads to a big bang. Rane Jim Callaghan had resigned the leadership of the Labour Party in celebration of losing the 1979 general election. He was led away beaming in a beautifully laundered suit, repeating,
"Creases? Ha! What creases?"
to himself over and over again. The party now had to choose their next surefire loser from either Dennis Healey, a pair of veteran eyebrows, or Michael's foot. They finally plumped for Michael's foot, which was on the left.
In protest, a group calling themselves the Fang of Gore formed a new party, the SOS. They were 4 individuals bound closely together by mutual distrust. The 4 consisted of
Lord Roy Junket.
In a memorable political career, Lord Junket held every position known to man, plus several known only to God.
Mrs. Worley Shillinghams.
Mrs. Shillinghams threw on the nearest tablecloth and rushed around the country, seeing both sides of the question.
Dr. David Owen Goal.
A former Foreign Secretary, Dr. Owen Goal was good at dividing, but bad at ruling. He was certainly a force to be reckoned with, or rather not to be reckoned with, because he wouldn't agree.
What do you mean I wouldn't agree? I disagree.
The other one.
The 4th member of the SOS was widely unmemorable.
I have with me in the studio the 4th member, Mr. No, don't tell me. What's it begin with? P. Yes, begins with P. Something like P. No, C. That's it, yes, I'm sure it begins with C.
Sadly, the leaders of the SOS didn't see eye to eye on the need for consensus. Dr. Owen Goal led a breakaway group, so they changed their name to the SO. Then Lord Roy Junket left to join the Liberals, so they changed their name once again, this time to the O. Finally, in an attempt to retain their distinctive identity, they changed their name to the... which they have remained ever since.
Buoyed up by his late wife's success in the hit musical Evita, in 1982, General Belgrano of Argentina sent his men to invade the Falkland Islands. The Falklands were inhabited by an ordinary, decent Briton, Poor Stanley. The Argentinians held Poor Stanley hostage in the village hall for the duration of hostilities, giving him nothing to eat but green goose. Mrs. Thatcherism vowed to win the Falklands back, and so sent the entire British Armed Forces 80,000 miles across the Atlantic in their boat. Poor Stanley was eventually liberated by the lanky English journalist Max Height. On hearing the good news, Mrs. Thatcherism memorably said, "We have become a grandmother."
After Michael's Foot lost the 1983 general election, the Labour Party elected Neil Knock-Knock, an after-dinner joke. Knock-Knock decided to take on the so-called lard heft in his party. He repeated himself over and over again until they could bear it no more. His opponents, in the dilettante tendency, believed in Santa Claus 4, whereby the workers put their stockings out empty and they came back full. Neil Knock-Knock set out his plans in a speech that was to last 8.5 hours.
I hope not only to talk, but to converse. And not only to converse, but to prattle. And not only to prattle, but to verbalise. And I say this to you now, I have no wish to be long-winded, loquacious.
At one point, it looked as though Mr. Knock-Knock was about to be voted Prime Minister, but he kept falling over into the sea and shouting,
"Och, aye, the new!"
So the voters decided against.
Mrs. Thatcherism is remembered for two things. A, the way she came in. B, the way she went out. 10 years separated these two events. They were known as the Thatcherism years. They were full of memorable affairs that are now largely forgotten.
The Westlife affair. Michael Vasseline, whose nickname was Marzipan, was a Tory high flyer with big hair. He desperately wanted a helicopter to help him fly his hair all over the country. Vasseline was determined that Westlife should build him his helicopter. But Mrs. Thatcherism preferred the rival claims of the S Club 7 consortium. One day, Michael Vasseline found he could take it no longer and stormed into a cabinet. He then embarked on a lengthy campaign to become Prime Minister by going up and down the country denying that he wanted to be Prime Minister.
The poll tax affair. Towards the end of her reign, Mrs. Thatcherism decided to tax everyone who kept a poll in their home in case they should decide to use it to mount a neighbourhood attack or community charge. She never used the term poll tax herself, preferring to describe it as the pool tax, targeted at the better off, or the peel tax, targeted at litter-louts. The polo tax was, on closer examination, found to have a hole in its centre.
A decade of British triumphs. In the 1980s, Britain regained her sense of ambition. From now on, she would no longer be the poor man of Europe. She would be the poor man of the world. It was a decade of British triumphs. In 1982, top British filmmakers David Putty and Colin Welloff won an Oscar for Chariots for Hire, in which top British athletes Liddell and Large raced each other around an Oxford college on quad bikes. Clutching his Oscar, Colin Welloff memorably said, "The British are coming." Sure enough, 17 years later, yet another British film was shortlisted for an Academy Award for costume design.
In the same year, top overweight cricketer Ian Bottoms single-handedly led the England cricket team to win the Ashes. Such a triumph meant it would be unsporting to win the Ashes again for another 20 years. So we were decent enough not to bother.
The best-selling book of the decade was The Time History of Briefs by Stephen Hawking. It sought to explain many baffling mysteries associated with the history of briefs, such as back holes and the big bulge, and presented a unifying theory of the Y-front. Do briefs run backwards? How short is a boxer? Is the elastic infinite? Can you glimpse a guiding hand behind your briefs? The book offered an explanation for the whole of creation, but sadly no one ever got to the end, so it remains a mystery.
The question mark invasion. In the 1980s, the question mark began to appear in random places when the young were talking. This was put down to the growing influence of Australian soap operas such as Neighbours.
Liver Aid was the first concert in which pop stars told ordinary, decent Britons how to behave. It was thus a memorable watershed. Up until then, pop stars had behaved badly, and ordinary, decent Britons had disapproved. From now on, the positions were to be reversed. 25 years later, heads of state continue to line up on an annual basis with their heads bowed and their hands held out. They are then rapped over the knuckles and told they must try harder by top Irish sunglasses Bonio and Sir Bob Geddoff.
Throughout the 1980s, the royal family both multiplied and divided, with exciting new members added every few months, some of them subtracting from the mystique. The wedding of the Prince Churlish to Lady Diana Spender took place in 1981. Looking back, keen observers felt that even at this early stage, the prince was a little offhand.
Do you take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?
Whatever that means.
It turned out that the two were not made for one another. The princess liked Hello and Wham, and anything else with an exclamation mark in its title. The prince preferred grand opera and the mystic writings of Salas Post. Shortly before the end of their marriage, the princess gave a TV interview in which she complained that the prince was a bad husband and useless at his job. She thought the broadcast would be a strictly private affair. But millions of ordinary decent Britons tuned in without asking.
Throughout the 80s, food was a tremendous worry. 50% of ordinary decent Britons were clinically obese and told to eat less. The other 50% were anorexic and told to eat more. It turned out that even the handful of people who ate the right amount had got it wrong. The MP, Edwina Kirby, got very excited. She warned that from now on, eggs should be eaten with semolina. No one liked semolina, so sales of eggs slumped, causing farmers no end of expense. Some experts felt the scare was exaggerated, so Mrs. Thatcherism thought it expedient to make an egg sample of the egocentric Edwina.
In an attempt to calm growing fears of LSE, BMX, ET, CID, PTA, PVC, TTFN and BTM, the Minister for Agriculture, John Seldom Grimmer, had himself photographed tucking into his own daughter. By the end of the 80s, most people had taken to eating instant food. The most popular was not poodles, best eaten with a spooner.
Inspired by the Jane Fondle workout video, ordinary decent Britons took to putting on skin-tight leopards and shaking their bodies up and down. Many dancers wore bulbous leg warmers to make the rest of their bodies look slimmer.
After 10 years, Mrs. Thatcherism's mild-mannered Foreign Secretary, Sir Geoffrey Who, began to resent the way she could never remember what he had just said. So he stood up in the House of Commons with a view to saying something memorable.
Mr. Speaker, it's rather like sending your opening batsman to the crease, and after due consideration of every possible outcome, and with respect for the umpire who, through dint of both talent and experience, has probably earned it, and certainly, I might add, deserves it.
To the sound of thunderous snores from all sides of the House, Sir Geoffrey Who concluded.
Had a chance to bowl is frankly irrelevant. That, sorry, where was I?
After many years of denials, Michael Vasseline finally issued a denial of his previous denials. He announced that he'd been unanimously persuaded by himself and his comb that together they would make a much better Prime Minister than Mrs. Thatcherism. Mrs. Thatcherism called her loyal ministers in one by one to ask them what they thought of her. Each of them told her she was absolutely marvellous, but that she'd possibly be even a little bit more marvellous if she left and never came back. She took the hint, opting to make a dignified exit from Downing Street, but even then there were those who detected a hint of bitterness in her tone.
This way, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're leaving Downing Street for the last time after 11.5 wonderful years. Now it's time for a new chapter to open, and I wish John Minor all the luck in the world. He'll be splendidly served, and he has the makings of a really very average Prime Minister, which I'm sure he'll manage to be in a very short time, before they quite rightly get rid of him.
She was then driven away, howling in tears, hammering on the windows, and waving a blue hanky through the back windows of her lock car. The Conservatives did not choose Michael Vasseline to take her job. Instead, they preferred to pick someone who didn't seem to want it so much. So, John Minor, an unmemorable Prime Minister, took her place. But no sooner had he entered Downing Street than he found she was still there, hiding behind a curtain, refusing to budge for a good 7 years. Your examination paper on the 1980s. Pens down, heads at the ready.
Where is your exclusion zone? Do we all have one?
Was the International Monetary Fund? If not, why not?
Which of these is not an Olympic sport? A. Ponting. B. Denning. C. Hambling. D. J.K. Rowling. E. Hawking.
Which of these would you rather do? Think the unthinkable, sink the unsinkable, wink the unwinkable, clink the unclinkable, stink the unstinkable. Attempt to forget each of the following: Theresa Gorman, Andrew Neil, Cabbage Patch Dolls, TVAM, Amadeus, the Rubik Cube, Noel's House Party, Bros.
How could you make Norman Fowler?
Why was Jim Pryor?
Compare and contrast Saatchi and Saatchi.
Which is the odd one out? Black Monday, Tuesday Weld, Black Wednesday, Black Thursday, Man Friday. Stop writing now.
1966 and all that.
The 1990s, a decade of two halves. The 1990s divide into two equal halves. The first half lasts 7 years. The second half lasts 3 years. From 1990 to 1997, Britain finds herself led by an unmemorable Prime Minister. Everything goes from bad to worse. But in the second half, from 1997 to the dawn of the new millennium, Britain turns overnight into a vibrant, new, young, modern country and leaves all her troubles behind her. As 1999 turns to 2000, ordinary Britons up and down the country set off to work with a spring in their steps and hope in their hearts, lustily singing with one voice their brand new national anthem, "Things can only get bitter." At last history has come to an end, and we can all rest in peace.
In the years of despair, Britain was governed by an unmemorable Prime Minister. As time went on, many senior Conservatives began to suspect that John Minor was not his own predecessor. It was an accusation he may well have denied, but no one can remember.
Some years later, it occurred to the Tory MP Edwina Kirby that she might well have had an affair with the unmemorable former Prime Minister, but she couldn't remember. The unmemorable former Prime Minister protested that he had already told his wife about the affair, but she had forgotten all about it.
A memorable vice-chairman.
Actually, Sue, to be quite honest, Geoffrey Archer is not my real name. I was in fact born Winston Spencer Churchill. Luckily, I broke the 4-minute mile, aged 14, on the very same day I was awarded a first-class honours degree from Oxford University. After a brief spell as drummer with the Beatles, I was elected unanimously to Parliament. As is well known, Sue, I rose fast through the ranks to become leader of the party and the very first teenage Prime Minister. I left Parliament to concentrate on writing novels. I won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1979 and again in 1980, though I refused to let this interfere with my career as one of England's top spin bowlers.
And your next record, please.
One of my own, actually, Sue. Honky Tonk Women, which I was lucky enough to record with my backing group, the Rolling Stones.
In 1992, the Duchess of Yarr was photographed with her financial advisor frolicking naked near a swimming pool. The Queen later described this as her anus horribilis in her Christmas message. The Queen appeared more than usually depressed.
Modern communications make it possible for me to talk to you in your homes and to wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, for what it's worth. Speaking personally for a moment, I've literally had it up to here. If it's not one thing, it's the other, and it never rains, but it pours. These techniques of the wireless and television may be modern, but the Christmas message is timeless. It's a message that says that whether you live in a stable or a palace, your family can be a perfect nuisance. I do not intend to name names, but they know who they are, and it is, I believe, high time they bucked up their ideas. The sooner this year is over, the better. Sometimes I don't know why I bother. I wish you a Merry Christmas, but certainly not them. Why on earth would I want to do that?
John Minor decided to introduce the daylight lottery. This encouraged poor people to donate money so that the rich could enjoy their opera in greater comfort. The daylight lottery made poor people poorer. One or two became richer, but television documentaries proved that this only made them unhappy, so no one really minded.
In the years of disaster and despair, many unmemorable Tory MPs were discovered paying prostitutes cash to ask them questions. In a memorable speech, Jonathan Aitken vowed to wield the simple, sordid truth, but this turned out to be a tactical error. At the same time, the Tory party began doing the splits on Europe. In 1995, to ease division, John Minor hit upon the brilliant idea of standing against himself for the leadership of his party. He told himself firmly to
put up or shut up.
He then decided to do both. After a fierce campaign, he won and immediately conceded defeat. By the onset of the 1997 general election, all the remaining Conservative MPs had resigned in disgrace. This left the Prime Minister to ride around the country alone on a soapbox, begging people not to tie his hands. Under the slogan, "Back to Bostik," he attempted to glue his party back together again, but without success. The Conservatives lost, but it was at least 10 years before they realised.
3 memorable sayings by, what's his name? 1.
Considerable.
2.
Quite considerable.
3.
When the final curtain comes down, it's time to blame Margaret Thatcherism.
The moment he died, John Smith became the most popular leader in the history of the Labour Party. The party immediately rallied around him. The 2 contenders to take his place were a young couple called Tony and Gordon. The 2 of them went out to dinner at an historic restaurant called Gravitas to decide which of them should be the next Prime Minister. Under a clever deal, each man came away thinking it was him.
Following a successful rock concert at the Festival Hall, Tony Blair was voted Prime Minister. He was quite clear what his priorities were.
Ask me my 3 priorities for government, and I'll tell you, education and education.
6 causes of the 1997 New Labour victory.
The Tories had all resigned in disgrace.
And Tony Blair played the guitar and wore jeans.
And there were going to be no more wars.
And no more scandals.
And everyone would agree about everything.
And New Labour were going to make everyone incredibly happy.
Tony Blair set out to build a new, young, happy Britain.
Look, Britain can be unbeatable. Make the good that is in the heart of each of us serve the good of all. May your days be merry and bright, and may all your Christmases be white. Have I told you lately that I love you? Knock 3 times on the ceiling if you want me. Twice on the pipe if the answer's no.
In 1997, after the Princess of Wales was killed in France, the new Prime Minister caught the mood of the public.
Look, I think what I'd say to you is simply this. She was an Austen princess. And I think, that is how she'll stay in our hearts and in our memories forever.
Anything more to add about her?
Sorry, about who?
Under Tony Blair, there was a new young cultural renaissance. This came to be known as Gruel Britannia.
Until the Spice Girls came along, pop groups had consisted of either people who could sing but couldn't dance, or people who could dance but couldn't sing. The Spice Girls set out to change all this. Their members consisted entirely of people who couldn't sing and couldn't dance. It proved a winning formula. The 5 of them squawked and flapped their arms. This gave birth to the term Gull Power.
A new pop group came along called Oasis. It consisted of the 2 elderly Gargler brothers, Loin and Mole. They swore, didn't shave, wore old clothes and burped. They were hailed as a breath of fresh air. They were proud to have written all their top 10 hits themselves. These included Hey Jude, Yellow Submarine, Hello Goodbye, and also the Ballad of John and Yoko, which Loin said was about him and his girlfriend, Pasty Kissett.
During the years of hope, lots of exciting new young British artists, or yobs, revolutionised the art scene. They became famous for being nearly as famous as people slightly more famous than themselves. Their work was collected and displaced by Screaming Lord Saatchi and Saatchi, a former advertisement, and Sir Rotter, director of Tatmonton, a former art gallery converted into a warehouse. Britain scored another triumph when the international team of Posh and Becks won the World Shopping Championship. After extensive training under tropical conditions, Posh and Becks proved capable of running down Bond Street and stripping all the shops bare in under 4 minutes. Posh and Becks then gave birth to 3 little shoppers. They christened them John Lewis, Harvey Nichols, and Boots.
In these years of hope, the decline in faith was halted forever. On Sundays, people would flock from far and wide to the Swedish church of Ikea. Once there, they would repent of their sins by walking round and round in circles in silence, touching as many different objects as they could. Finally, they forced themselves to stand in line for hours and hours, bearing great weights. Their penance continued at home, where they had to weep in front of 26 different-shaped pieces of wood, an instruction map with no words but 103 arrows, and never quite enough nuts and screws.
To celebrate the year 2000, a giant dome was to be built at Greenwich. It would be the envy of the world. The minister, Peter Meddlesome, boasted that the Millennium Dome would be capable of holding 18,000 unwanted double-decker buses, 131 Albert Halls, 3.8 billion pints of beer, 11.2 million deck chairs, 17.5 billion cupcakes, or 12 million doctors and nurses laid end to end and stacked. In a major speech, Meddlesome revealed he had already extracted firm promises from corporate sponsors for 2 double-deckers, half an Albert Hall, a couple of pints of beer, 7 deck chairs, and a cupcake.
History ends yet again. At the dawn of the new millennium, Britain was wonderfully new and young and modern and vibrant once more. Henceforth, nation would live in peace with nation, and all the people would be living life as one. There would be no more war and no more strife. Disputes would be settled with a nod and a wink and a cheery thumbs up. From now on, Tony Blair and his friends in New Labour would build the world a home.
And, we'll furnish it with love. And grow apple trees and honeybees and, snow white turtle doves, why not? Ordinary, decent Britons will work together in perfect harmony, all standing hand in hand. And, you can hear them echo through the hills for peace throughout the land. I just think that's important.
At the stroke of midnight, all the most brilliant and attractive Britons joined arms in the splendid new Millennium Dome, happy in the knowledge that this magnificent creation would act as a shining beacon to the whole world. It was the end of history and the dawning of a new era. From now on, nothing could possibly go wrong, go wrong, go wrong, go wrong, wrong, or would go wrong.
Your examination paper on the 1990s. Pens down, heads at the ready. First, listen to this speech by John Crespot.
The Tory comments are really highlighted in the beer map which we produced in the summer. We're giving copies to every delegate here. Sorry, I'm not very good with the language.
Question 1. Come again? Question 2. I'm sorry? Question 3. Could you repeat that?
Why did dringe binking become a clause for concern or whatever?
Which Conservative leader described himself as the quit man before resigning?
Why was Claire short?
What did Robin cook?
Why did David Blunkett?
Which was Jack Straw?
What made Gordon brown?
Why does it always rain on me? Illustrate employing diagrams where necessary. Before finishing this series, listen to it all the way through one more time. Now forget it. Your mind should now be furnished with a complete misunderstanding of all the modern history that never happened. Stop writing now.